It started with a whisper, a rumor sharp enough to cut through London's calm like broken glass. And trust me, you'll want to stay locked in till the end of this one. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a like. It keeps cases like this on your radar. The spring light slanted through the half-closed blinds of Baker Street, striping the room with gold as Sherlock Holmes sat buried under monographs, newspapers, and scattered chemical vials. His long fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the arm of his chair, a signal I'd learned to interpret as bored genius approaching critical meltdown. "You look dangerously underworked, Holmes," I remarked, dropping into the chair opposite him. "And you, Watson, carry the gait of a man who dismissed his final patient of the morning," he answered without lifting his eyes. "A trace of formaldehyde hangs on your left lapel, so I take it you visited the laboratory first." I laughed, shaking my head. "You make observation feel like cheating." He allowed himself a thin smile, but before he could deliver a retort, Mrs. Hudson swept in with a visiting card balanced neatly on a tray. "A Mr. Harold Litton to see you, sir." Holmes motioned for the man to be admitted. Litton entered with the clipped posture of a seasoned editor, though his composure was cracked by unmistakable anxiety. "Mr. Holmes," he began, "I am editor-in-chief of the London Gazette. I bring not gossip but something far more insidious." Holmes rose slightly. "Your hand injured recently." Litton removed his glove, wincing as the burned flesh caught the light. 3 days ago, I received an unsigned envelope written in a strange, shimmering ink. The moment I touched it, my hand burned. My physician cannot identify the substance." Holmes leaned closer, intrigued. "And the contents?" "That," Litton said grimly, "is the greater threat." The letter predicted 2 political scandals with exact precision, both of which broke in rival papers within 48 hours. Events not yet public. Information no one should have possessed. Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Prophecy delivered in poisoned ink. Watson, this is no trivial jape." Litton swallowed hard. "I believe whoever wrote it intends far more than mischief. And I fear I am not the only target." Holmes steepled his fingers. The room felt suddenly smaller. "You did well coming here, Mr. Litton," he said. "We'll crack this open before someone else pays the price." Fleet Street was a living machine that morning, ink in the air, carts rattling over wet cobblestones, errand boys sprinting like they were paid by the heartbeat. Holmes and I pushed through the noise toward the tall stone facade of the London Gazette, where Litton met us with the same strained expression he'd worn the day before. "I've kept everything exactly as it arrived," he said, guiding us past rows of desks where journalists worked with the twitchy intensity of men who lived on deadlines and caffeine. "The letter and its envelope are locked in my office safe." Holmes scanned the room as we walked. His eyes halted on a young clerk in the back, a wiry fellow poring over proofs with unnatural focus. Holmes didn't comment, but I knew he'd filed the detail away. Inside Litton's cramped office, the editor produced the letter with visible reluctance. Holmes didn't touch it at first. Instead, he inhaled lightly, closing his eyes. "Vegetal with a metallic bite. Nothing commercial," he murmured. He examined the handwriting through his lens, a clumsily disguised script with uneven slants and forced loops. "The writer masked their hand," Holmes said. "Right-handed, fast writer, but deliberately restraining their natural motion." With a pencil tip, he lifted a corner of the paper. Thick, fibrous, stamped with a faint watermark. Cascadura Mill, Pará Province. "Imported Brazilian stock," Holmes noted. "Rare in London. Someone went out of their way." Litton shifted uneasily. "There's more. 3 other editors received similar letters: the Herald, the Evening Standard, the Weekly Record. Same ink, same tone, same precise predictions." Holmes's expression hardened. "All forecasting scandals before they broke." "Exactly," Litton said. "Each one came true." Holmes scraped a trace of ink into a vial. "We'll need to study this further and compare it to the other letters." When we returned to the street, Holmes was already accelerating mentally. "Watson," he said, voice low, "someone is orchestrating these events with 2 dangerous talents: inside information and chemistry. Before I could answer, he hailed a cab. "We're not chasing a prankster," he continued as the horse lurched forward. "We're dealing with a strategist, someone who knows exactly where to strike and how to make the message impossible to ignore." His eyes glinted with that unmistakable energy, the one that meant the game had just escalated. "And mark my words," he added, "the ink may burn skin, but the truth behind it may burn nations." The cab rattled eastward, and I realized the case was already spiraling beyond scandal. Someone had weaponized information itself, and Holmes intended to break the chain before the next letter ignited something far worse. The next afternoon, Holmes and I sat across from Alfred Glenroy, the hard-edged editor of the Herald, a man known for publishing truth even when it bit. Today, however, his booming voice was dulled by fatigue, and his bandaged hand matched Litton's wounds almost exactly. "I assumed it was some caustic residue on the paper," Glenroy said, lifting his wrapped fingers. "Only when Litton contacted me did I realize something calculated was at play." Holmes leaned in, his analytical gaze sharpening. "And the letter itself," Glenroy produced a folder. Inside lay a sheet identical to Litton's. The same thick Brazilian stock and the same iridescent ink that shimmered like oil on water. Holmes read the message aloud. "By the time you read this, the member for South Kennington will resign. The story breaks tomorrow." "And did it?" Holmes asked. Glenroy nodded grimly. "Railway bribery scandal. We published it within a day." Holmes studied the letter, tapping the edge thoughtfully. "The writer clearly has access to information before it becomes public. Not prediction, advanced knowledge." "An insider," I suggested. "Not merely that," Holmes said. "Someone with reach into multiple departments, or someone collecting leaks from those who think they're talking in confidence." Before Glenroy could respond, he slid another envelope across the desk. "This arrived this morning. I haven't touched it." Holmes slipped on gloves and opened the letter with surgical precision. The message was colder than the fog outside. "Diplomatic trust will fracture before the ink dries on the treaty. Watch the headlines within 48 hours. Glenroy stiffened. "Surely not the Anglo-European Accord. The negotiations have hung by a thread for months." Holmes reread the letter slowly. Something in the cadence seemed designed not to inform but to destabilize. "At what time did it arrive?" Holmes asked. "Just after 8. "Note that, Watson," Holmes said. "These letters are timed to perfection. Each one lands just early enough to imply omniscience." "And the ink?" I asked. Holmes's expression darkened. "We saw burns on 2 editors. This isn't an aesthetic flourish, it's a delivery filter. Only the editor himself would dare handle such letters." Glenroy exhaled. "What do you recommend?" "Do nothing except alert me," Holmes replied. "If another arrives, do not open it. These letters are pieces on a board, and their sender is already several moves ahead." As we returned to the street, Holmes's stride quickened. "We're no longer chasing a writer," he said. "We're hunting an operator. Someone who knows politics, chemistry, and timing better than most men know their own pulse. And if the next letter targets diplomacy itself—" He paused at the curb, eyes narrowing. "Then the stakes are no longer personal. They're national." A cab rattled toward us and Holmes flagged it down without hesitation. "We start with the chemists," he said. "Ink that burns isn't bought, it's engineered." And just like that, the investigation shifted gears. The letters were no longer just warnings. They were weapons. Holmes turned our sitting room into a makeshift laboratory. Beakers hissed, vapors curled upward, and the sharp smell of alcohol mixed with something bitter. For nearly 2 hours, he moved in a tight circuit from microscope to notebook to spirit lamp. Samples from Litton's and Glenroy's letters lay on dishes and slides, each droplet of shimmering ink a piece of evidence. "At last," he murmured over the microscope, "something worthy of effort." I rose from my chair. "You found the source." "I've found its design," he replied. "The ink rides on glycerin to keep it wet and dangerous. The color is indigo with a mineral dye for that peculiar sheen, but the true villain is the toxin." He lifted a small beaker where a cloudy liquid swirled. "A South American plant extract," he said. Latex from Euphorbia latissima, devil's milk, highly irritant, capable of producing burns like those on the editor's hands. So the burns were deliberate, I said. Entirely, Holmes answered. After a few incidents, no clerk or errand boy will dare touch these envelopes. Only the editor handles them. The pain becomes both signature and guarantee. He watched as the liquid separated into two pale layers. Insoluble in water, soluble in alcohol, he mused. Our chemist knows enough to be careful, but not enough to vanish. And the paper, I asked. That Brazilian watermark cannot be chance. It is not, Holmes replied. Only a few London suppliers import stock from Pará province. I have already sent inquiries. A knock sounded. Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram. Holmes read it, and a brief smile touched his face. A shipment from Brazil 3 weeks ago, he said. One buyer paid in Eastern European silver and ordered Cascadura mill paper in bulk. You believe this is our correspondent? I believe, Holmes said, reaching for his coat, that our unseen author has left fingerprints in ink and currency. We know the poison, the paper, and roughly when it entered the country. Now we follow the money. Soon we stood in a cramped stationer's shop off Fleet Street, its windows fogged with dust. The proprietor, Merrick, studied our sample through cracked spectacles and nodded. Cascadura mill, right enough, he said. Sold at once not long ago. Man with a scarf up to his ears and gloves he never removed. Paid in foreign silver, Holmes asked. Eastern minting. Wanted special ink as well, iridescent, slow drying. Where did you send him for the ink? Holmes said. To Kellett at the Inkworks on Penton Street, Merrick replied. If there's a trail, it's in whatever they mixed for him there. Back outside, Holmes looked toward Penton Street. Our adversary buys rare paper with foreign coin, commissions exotic ink, and laces it with a toxin from the Amazon, he said. This is not improvisation, Watson, this is strategy. And if he is that careful, I asked, how do we catch him? Holmes's smile was thin. By going where his precautions run out. Ink can be altered, handwriting disguised. But somewhere in this city, a man still has to post those letters. Tonight, he added, we hunt not in the lab but in the streets. Night settled over Fleet Street like a damp curtain, muting the clatter of printing presses and turning the gas lamps into wavering halos. Holmes and I stood tucked between a tobacconist's wall and a shuttered print shop, shadows swallowed in deeper shadows. Our man favors dusk, Holmes murmured. Creatures of habit always do. For 2 evenings straight, he'd watched the flow of Fleet Street with predatory patience, messengers darting, clerks locking up, editors slipping into cabs. But tonight he was certain the sender would strike again. At precisely 5, Holmes nudged my arm. There. A lone figure approached from the far end, gliding rather than walking. Long coat, gloves despite the mild air, hat brim pulled low. He paused at the herald's entrance, produced an envelope from inside his coat and slid it through the letterbox. Holmes's breath sharpened. Left leg limp, old injury. We tracked him with our eyes as he repeated the ritual at the weekly record, depositing another letter with the same calculated care. Then he turned east, heading toward Ludgate Circus. Holmes leaned close. I stay here, you follow him, keep distance, no engagement. Observe, report in 1 hour. My pulse jumped, but I nodded. Then I slipped into the crowd and shadowed the man, weaving behind cabs and market stalls whenever he glanced back. Twice he paused, testing the street, but I kept to doorways and lampposts, just another shape in the fog. He finally drifted toward St. Bride's Church, slipping through an iron gate into the rear of an aging boarding house. I waited, memorizing the address and the peeling sign above the door. Langley House, weekly rooms. Satisfied, I returned to the alley where Holmes waited. He emerged from a tiny stationer's shop looking grimly pleased. Excellent timing, Watson. I believe our quarry is tightening his own noose. I relayed my observations, the figure, the limp, the boarding house. Holmes listened, eyes narrowing in concentration. Very good, he said. Tomorrow morning we visit Langley House. But before that, I need one last conversation with an ink merchant who may hold the missing piece. The next morning, we navigated a maze of narrow streets south of Fleet Street, landing at the Inquirks, a modest shop thick with the smell of linseed oil and glue. The air shimmered faintly with colored pigments stored in stoppered jars. "Mr. Kellett," Holmes said, addressing the bespectacled man behind the counter. "Some months ago, a customer requested a custom blend, iridescent, slow drying, used with Brazilian paper." Kellett frowned, thinking. "Gloves, scarf, foreign accent. Yes, I remember. Ordered a viscous ink, metallic tint. Very particular. Didn't want his hands exposed to the ingredients." Holmes exchanged a look with me, confirmation layered with something colder. Our adversary wasn't merely cunning. He was cautious enough to fear his own tools. "Did he purchase anything else?" Holmes asked. "A neutralizing powder for chemical irritants," Kellett said, "and asked how to package ink to prevent evaporation. Paid in foreign coin." When we stepped back into the street, Holmes spoke quietly. "Our man hides his face, guards his hands, buys custom toxins, and posts letters at dusk through targeted doors. He moves like a ghost, but ghosts still leave footprints." He turned toward Fleet Street, coat flaring with purpose. "Tonight, Watson, we stop following footprints. We start following the man." The fog rolled in again, thicker than the night before, the perfect cover for a hunter, and Holmes had already chosen his ground. By dusk the following day, Fleet Street was a churning river of paper, voices, and smoke. Holmes and I approached Langley House, the shabby boarding establishment I had tailed our suspect to the night before. The building leaned slightly, as if weary from years of housing secrets no one wanted to keep. Percy Lang, the nervous clerk from the Gazette, waited near the alley. He twisted his cap with trembling fingers. "He rented the top floor," Lang whispered. "Calls himself Mr. Reed, but once I heard someone call him Varick." Holmes gave a curt nod. "Stay outside. If anyone approaches, signal twice." Inside, the staircase groaned under our weight. Peeling wallpaper curled like dried leaves. At the final door, Holmes paused, inhaling the faint chemical odor seeping from within. The lock surrendered to his tools with barely a protest. The room was dim, lit only by a half-covered oil lamp. Ink fumes mingled with a bitter medicinal tang. On a small writing desk lay stacks of clipped articles, foreign letters, scraps of coded notes, and glass vials containing remnants of that iridescent ink. Holmes moved with surgical efficiency, rifling through a leather valise on the bed. "Government memos," he muttered, "naval procurement reports, foreign office dispatches, all stolen, all sensitive." I lifted a folded sheet from the desk. "This one bears the seal of Vienna's diplomatic bureau." "Stolen or purchased," Holmes replied. "Either way, enough to fabricate scandals on demand." He inspected the coat hanging on the rack. Beneath the brim of the hat, he revealed a faint dusting of neutralizing powder. "Our man knows his poison," Holmes said quietly, "and fears it." A sound stopped him cold. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, climbing the stairwell. Holmes extinguished the lamp and we flanked the door, silent as shadows. Keys rattled. The door opened. A tall man stepped inside, lean frame, sharp beard, high forehead, gloves tucked into his coat. He closed the door, unaware he was being watched, and reached for the papers on the desk. Holmes struck first. His cane cracked sharply across the man's wrist, sending the letters flying. I locked the door behind him as the intruder stumbled back, eyes blazing. "Good evening, Mr. Varick," Holmes said calmly. "Or shall I call you Radislav Varick, former attaché to the Balkan legation, current fugitive and author of London's Little Firestorm?" Varick exhaled slowly, almost amused. "I expected Mycroft. Instead, I get the younger brother playing detective in the dark." "Your methods are not diplomatic," Holmes replied. "Stolen intelligence, toxic ink, engineered leaks. You destabilize governments with stationery." Varick's gaze darted toward his coat, the pocket where he kept something concealed. "Don't," Holmes warned. "Watson is armed." I wasn't, but Varick didn't know that. Holmes gathered the letters, ink vials, and documents into his satchel. "This ends now." "You cannot stop truth," Varick hissed. "But you did not deliver truth," Holmes answered. You delivered sabotage dressed as revelation. Holmes signaled me. Within minutes, military intelligence agents arrived, men Mycroft had already placed on standby. They escorted Varick out in silence. As the fog thickened around us, Holmes spoke quietly. He was only one piece. Someone else wrote the playbook. Someone who moves in diplomatic circles, not cheap boarding rooms. We stepped back into the cold night, the city humming with secrets. "Tomorrow, Watson," Holmes said, "we stop chasing the scribe. We go after the strategist." 3 days after Varick's arrest, London began stitching itself back together. Newspapers speculated about foreign interference, but the worst of the plot had been diffused before it could ignite. Still, Holmes wasn't celebrating. He sat at the fireplace, fingers steepled, eyes narrowed in that way he had when the surface victory only sharpened his focus on the deeper game. "Mycroft has finished interrogating Varick," he said at last. "And?" I asked. He confessed freely, almost proudly. His goal wasn't merely scandal, it was destabilization. A fracture in the Anglo-European treaty would ripple across half the continent. And he acted alone. Holmes gave a humorless laugh. "Varick is a blade, Watson. Blades don't choose their own direction." He stood and crossed to the window where the city glimmered under a pale morning sun. "There is another hand behind this, someone with reach, protection, and diplomatic cover." "Petrovic," I said. Holmes nodded. "Operating under the guise of a minor envoy. Too insulated to arrest, too cunning to confront directly. Varick was only his instrument." He picked up the final unopened letter, retrieved the night Varick was caught, and held it to the light. False allegations, forged signatures, twisted truths, all crafted to obliterate the Foreign Secretary's credibility. I shuddered. "If Willoughby had opened it, the treaty would have collapsed," Holmes said, "and the Crown would have walked blindfolded into international chaos." But Holmes had intercepted it. The ink never touched Willoughby's skin. The lies never reached the headlines. "Truth survives," I murmured. "Not by accident," Holmes replied. "Truth must be defended, especially in a world fueled by telegrams and headlines." He tossed the forged letter into the fire. The flames curled around it, devouring its poison until nothing remained but ash. Later that afternoon, we walked along the Thames, the city rumbling steadily around us. Holmes spoke softly, almost to himself. "Do you wonder, Watson, how close we came? Not to murder, but to something far more corrosive. A single engineered lie can topple governments faster than any bullet." "And yet," I said, "you stopped it." He offered a rare, small smile. "For now, but someone somewhere is already drafting the next letter." The wind shifted, stirring the river's surface. Holmes turned up his collar, his silhouette sharp against the gray sky. "Stay observant, Watson. Ink may seem harmless until it burns." If you want more cases like this, hit subscribe and drop a like. It keeps the investigations coming. And tell me in the comments, what do you think was the real endgame behind the poisoned ink?